Welcome, dear students, to the third part of this video series on testing. This time we'll have a look at end-to-end testing, and the library that we'll use for end-to-end testing is called Nightwatch, like this painting by the famous painter Rembrandt. Now, I will explain how Nightwatch works, or how end-to-end testing in the browser generally works. If you want to know more about Nightwatch, I can recommend you the guide and of course the API documentation. So this is the Nightwatch webpage, where it tells you why it's a good idea to use for end-to-end testing, even with an example. And of course, they also have a paid plan so they can make some money. But it's an open source project. And in the API reference, you can see all of the commands that you can use and the assertion functions. So this is similar to jest. You can also use assert and expect to test things. And we'll have a closer look at that in an example. So how does end-to-end testing in a browser actually work? And it's more or less a question of automating your browser. So back in the days, this has been done with the famous Selenium library, which just gives you a way of automating things in your browser, like navigating, clicking, testing the state of things, selecting things, and all of those common tasks that a user might do. And it has now been standardized in the WebDriver API. So for each browser, there is now a WebDriver implementation, which is usually just called browser name plus driver. So for Firefox, it's the Gecko driver, because Firefox uses the Gecko rendering engine. There's a Chrome driver, there's a Microsoft web driver, and there's a Safari driver. And each of those web drivers can drive a browser and do things with the browser, automate the browser. And the drivers themselves have an API. And this API is what Nightwatch is calling. So Nightwatch will start a session in a, for example, Chrome driver. It will then navigate to, say, Ecosia, the search engine. So the Chrome driver will then navigate to that URL, and the web driver will send a response to Nightwatch. And this is how browser automation and end-to-end testing usually works. For setting up Nightwatch, I've created a very small example that I want to show you. This is an example repository on GitHub where there's a minimal Nightwatch config and a minimal Cucumber config if you want to use Cucumber. I will tell you in the end of this video what Cucumber is. And for setting up Nightwatch end-to-end test in your Vue.js application, there is, of course, the official Vue CLI 3 plugin. So similar to jest, you just have to type vue add e to e-nightwatch, I think, or just have a look at documentation. You just have to install the plugin, everything is set up for you, and it will also create 2 example tests that you can adapt for your needs. Now, first, how are tests actually written in Nightwatch? So it's just a matter of locating page elements. You can use CSS selectors for that. You might also use XPath if you want. You write a file for each of your tests, and those are then loaded as a test suite. You can use commands from the WebDriver protocol to automate your browser, and then you can assert certain things like element has text this and that, the input has this or this text, the browser has navigated to another page object has been created. You can test all sorts of things. And in the end, you have to tell Nightwatch that your browser session can now be closed, and it will tell the WebDriver that the session can be closed, and it will close the browser then. So let's get to my minimal config. So you can check this project out, and you can see that to get started with end-to-end tests, we will test existing live websites. So here I only have Nightwatch as a dependency and a Chrome driver. Of course, you have to add other driver libraries if you want to test Firefox, Edge, and whatever. And there's just a basic Nightwatch CLI call and a call that provides a headless browser. Now, when I run this, you can see that the browser will start and it's automated. So the test suite is run, the browser is started, and then it opens up DuckDuckGo, and it will wait for a short timeout, type something into the field, and then it will test if the result that was expected will appear. And then you can see a nicely formatted test output, and that's it. Magic. And with the other command, you can run the tests without a GUI. So these are, of course, a bit faster because the browser doesn't have to render all of the pages. And this is what you would do in a CI pipeline, for example, or with local development, because you might not want to watch your browser each time that it does all of those things. And this works the same. Now, in here, I just have a very small Nightwatch config file. You can have a look at the documentation to see what all of those things do, but basically you have to configure your WebDriver, which in my case is Chrome, and then you can add various test settings. For example, there's a default setting and a headless setting, and you would do all of this for each of the drivers that you use. So in my case, I use Chrome. I want JavaScript to be enabled. I want Chrome to accept all of the HTTPS certificates so that I can access HTTPS sites. And you can also pass command line arguments to the headless to the browser itself, which is cool. Now the tests are in the folder tests. So let's go to the folder tests, and there's just a demo.js file, and that's basically it for the setup. And in here, I can have multiple tests. When I have multiple tests, this is then, of course, called a test suite. And in my test, I receive a client or a browser object, depends on your style. I can also rename this to browser, if that's more familiar to you. And then you can do all sorts of commands. So I have a look at the documentation. Of course, there's a command to navigate to a page. There is a command to pause, to set input values, to submit forms, all of those things. And what you can see here are expect assertions. So when I go to the page DuckDuckGo, I expect the body to be present before a 1000 millisecond timeout. I expect the body to have a certain class, and I expect the page to contain some text, and I expect the search input to be available, which is an input element where I can input stuff. And yeah, so it's more or less the same as writing a jest test, but it's run in an actual browser and is therefore a bit slower. Cool. Now, when your tests get more complex, you might use a concept called page objects. These are also explained in the documentation. A page object is more or less a representation of a page, where you set or where you define all of the elements, sections, and can also write custom commands that are helpful in your page. So a page object might, for example, be another file, for example, Google.js. So my page is Google, and I can set the URL. I can set custom commands, and I can set elements that I want to use in my test. So this helps with selecting elements over and over again. So you might select the search bar and the submit button more than once in your test. So it might be a good idea to write a page object. And a page object can also give you custom commands. These are then called similar to all of the other WebDriver commands, but do things that you want to do. So in this case, there's a submit command, which pauses for a second, and then it waits for the submit button to be visible, clicks the submit button, and it waits for the submit button to disappear. So this is basically just a group of WebDriver commands, so you don't have to write them more often. And this is the page object, and the test itself would then look like this. So you have to call the page object, or you instantiate the page object with browser page Google. Then you have a Google page object. You can set the value of elements that you've defined in the page object. So this add search bar is this search bar element, and it will look for the first input text element. And then you can do actions on this element, and the test is done. This is very nice. Now, as I've already told you, now you can write your own commands to extend Nightwatch. You could also write your own assertions. You could also write your own reporters, and there are examples for this in the official documentation. Now, that's all there is to Nightwatch. It's just, giving commands to the browser and then writing assertions. Now, another thing that's interesting is Cucumber. Cucumber is on the is really on the behavior-driven development train, and it aims to keep requirements, specs, tests, and docs in sync. And it does this by abstracting the test code into its own language. So when you have a look at the Cucumber side, you can see that it's actually just a specification for a special language for writing tests. So your tests might be a feature. Eating too many cucumbers isn't good for you. And the feature has different scenarios, and it has different specifications. So the specification might be given Alice is hungry, when she eats 3 cucumbers, then she will be full. These given when then keywords are basically what's the core of Cucumber. And the idea behind this is that also less technical persons, or your product owner, or non-programmers can write tests for you. And so there's this language specification, and the way this works is that you have to map this text to Nightwatch commands in the end. The way this works is also something that you can see in my example. So my basic example has another folder called Cucumber, where I have the same or similar Nightwatch conf, but I don't run Nightwatch, I run the Cucumber CLI. The Cucumber CLI has a few arguments, like it has to load this config file, it also has to load all of the JavaScript files in this folder, and it should use a custom formatter. But in the end, it's still an end-to-end test. Now I also have to configure Cucumber, and you can see that there's additional dependencies here. There's still the Nightwatch and the Chrome driver, but now there's also the Cucumber CLI and a custom formatter for Cucumber Pretty. I'm sorry that I've sneezed into my hand, I shouldn't do that. This is just a custom formatter that changes the output of the code. The other thing that you can see here is Nightwatch API. Now the fun thing is that we've now added another level of abstraction. So we have, of course, we have the browser, and the browser has an API that's being used by the WebDriver. The WebDriver then automates the browser. The WebDriver has an API that's being used by Nightwatch, and Nightwatch controls the WebDriver. Now what we want is another API for Nightwatch so that Cucumber can control Nightwatch. So there's this very large stack now, but the configuration is still pretty easy. So with the Nightwatch API, I can just start WebDriver sessions and close them again. And the Cucumber CLI also has just a before and after, and then it runs the test. Now, there's a very good article that I've linked in the slides that goes into more detail on how this all of this works, but for now, I just want to show you how the tests work. So in Cucumber, you have features, and each feature file might be a search, for example. It has different scenarios like searching DuckDuckGo and searching it again. And here's the given then and keywords. So given I open DuckDuckGo's search page, then the title is Privacy Simplified and the DuckDuckGo search form exists. That's very easy to read. There's another one for Google. Now, when I run this, it will open up a browser again, this time not a headless browser, but an actual browser, and run these two test suites, which are in my feature files. So Cucumber tests are very nice to read, and also if you have these very well written tests, you can also use them for the output here. So the test output is very readable. Now, how does this work? The way this works is by writing step definitions. And the step definition uses the Cucumber given then end functions, and it maps regex regular expressions to normal Nightwatch functions. You can go crazy with this, but in its basic form, it's just if the text I open DuckDuckGo search page is encountered, then I will just navigate to DuckDuckGo. Could of course make this very general and make very powerful step definitions. But in its basics form, it's like this. For your projects, it doesn't matter if you want to use Nightwatch or Cucumber, just please write some sort of end-to-end tests to test your application. Of course, end-to-end tests are difficult if you don't run your whole application with all of its services yourself, but in your end-to-end tests, you might just want to test your live code for now, because you won't have an testing environment where you have copied all of your dependencies or all of your external services. Or you just test stuff that can be tested locally, where no API calls are made and there are no dependencies. So that's it for now for end-to-end testing. If you've set up end-to-end testing for your projects and you are not sure if you have written enough tests, or if you're not sure that I'm convinced that you know what end-to-end testing is and how it works and how to use Nightwatch Cucumber, just call me or write me an email and we can talk about that. And this concludes the third video in the testing series, and see you again soon.